Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. Thanks so much for joining us this evening and sharing your time with us. We know that time is probably one of the most precious things we have, so when people do take the time to listen to our shows, please know how greatly we appreciate that. I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for that amazing intro. If you haven't checked out his website, nativestorytellers.com, please do. He and his wife have a fabulous website there, and listening to their stories is an adventure in history and mysticism and magic and wonder. So check it out when you get a chance. Mark's got a great guest tonight, one of my favorite people, and I can't wait for them to get going because they're always so much fun when they get together. So, Mark, want to take it away?
All right. Hey, it's nice to have you back, Barbara.
Nice to be back.
Yeah, it was like two months without my sidekick.
Well, I was here. I just wasn't kicking.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we had last week there was 3 days of tech issues. But,
running silent, I think they call it in submarine, running silent. Yes, no noise, okay. No voice, no nothing.
But I did a little talk with Blog Talk's English Robo Babe, and she knows who's the boss now.
Oh, yeah. Say it quietly, please.
Okay. Yeah, and I wanted to let everyone know the Twilight Zone at 60 conference was a success. Just a lot of fun, amazing people. Attendance was greatly boosted over last year, so hopefully some of the people heard the shows. But there were people from Ireland, England, Brazil, Canada, in many places from the East Coast. And made lots of new friends like Johnny, Helen, Shelley, Mark Olshaker, and got reacquainted with others like Mike, Nick, Martin, Mark, and Ann, and they've all been guests with us. And I'm working on developing some other shows based on some of the presenters. Rick Osmond said the AAPS, had very good attendance as well, and everyone had a great time. Wayne mentioned that there were some new projects in the works, and Rick mentioned Lon Krieger's presentation was very informative. And then there's the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Conference, October 17th through the 20th at the Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut. So we've been promoting those 4 conference and the Mothman conference. So we've done 3 of them. There's 1 more to go, but so far they've gone very well. And as we enter the Halloween season, we thought it'd be appropriate to have the Queen of Halloween return, maybe from beyond the grave, or at least from the beach. Varla Ventura is here to give us goosebumps, laughs, and her insights. She's the author of Paranormal Parlor, Banshees, Werewolves, Vampires, and Other Creatures of the Night, Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm and among the mermaids, facts, myths, and enchantments from the sirens of the seas. And so let's bring on Varla first. Hi, Varla.
Hi.
How you doing?
Hi, Mark. Hi, Barbara.
Good.
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Happy October.
Yeah. It's the month, the season.
The month.
Whole month of celebrations. And the last time you were on Nightlight Part 2, I think you were leaving like the next day or so for Jamaica or the Caribbean to research pirates. So how's that?
That's what I told
along?
everyone. I said I was researching pirates, but really, it was wonderful. I went to a couple different places in the Caribbean, and I actually went to the Turks and Caicos as well, and discovered some little-known pirate history there in between, rum tasting. I mean, that's pirate research, right? You gotta know what.
Okay, so you had your toes. So basically, you had your toes in the sand, pina colada in your writing hand, and no book. So the introductions basically was longer than our discussion on pirates.
Look, you call it what you want. I call it research, okay? I need to live as the pirates once lived.
Okay, I see your method.
To really feel, I needed to feel, what does this water feel like? What is this beach like on a moonlit night? These kinds of things are, just sort of setting the stage for the research. Well, you were kind of teasing me because I've been talking about this book for quite a while, and I have actually been working on it. But you were saying, is the book done yet? It's like, well, no, it's not done yet. But I did actually I did do some legitimate research. I traveled all over. I did some Florida Keys, Jamaica, and I did go down all the way to the Turks and Caicos, where I was sort of surprised by some of the hidden pirate history that I found there. Not as extensive as it would be in some of the other more northern Caribbean islands, but there was definitely some interesting stories there. And so I also took a trip to Ireland and did some pirate research there. Yeah, it's funny because I initially started out thinking that the majority of my stories and the things that I'd be researching would be in the Caribbean, which a lot of pirate history is in that area. But the thing is, a lot of the pirates were Irish, English, Spanish. There were a few Dutch pirates. They were defecting against the crown, right? Like that's what they were sort of fighting against. So there are a lot of pirate origin stories, especially in Ireland and places where pirates lived and ruled the Irish coastline. So as you know, that's one of my favorite places to go. I don't need an excuse to travel to Ireland, but it had been a while, and I'm always researching. I love folklore wherever I go. I'm asking questions and meeting local archaeologists who are doing tours and asking them things. And there's always, Ireland's such a magical country. There's always something new to discover there. You could go there, you could visit there every year as on a regular vacation and still have a completely unique experience. And it's just a magical place. It's one of those places that if you plan all the things that you think you're going to do, yes, you can do the tourist circuit and, you can kind of, kiss the Blarney Stone and all of that. Lord knows I don't need to kiss the Blarney Stone, right? Stop.
I think you have the gift of gab even before going to Ireland, so.
It's in my blood.
Yeah.
So I think, and it's always good to go back and be reminded of this, and I think people who travel to Ireland and people who live in Ireland can attest to this, but it's really the kind of place that you've got to just slow down and let Ireland do you. You don't go there and whirlwind through it, and you can take a tour bus right over, some fairy mound and you wouldn't even know it. But when you stop and you just take a little time and you have some things unplanned and you wander, you find incredible things. You meet incredible people. You learn stories. Everybody has stories. And I'm telling you, the cab driver is going to tell you, is a better storyteller than I could ever think to be. It's this wonderful part of the culture that I think that's one of the reasons I'm always going back there, because I really admire how much they revere the arts and literature and the art of storytelling and the art of storytelling, the actual act of sharing stories. So I had a great time, and I discovered a pirate that I didn't know very much about. And I just completely fell in love with her, and she's definitely a strong, a big chunk of that. There's a whole chapter in my book. So I have a chapter about famous pirates, of course, but I dedicated an entire chapter to famous female pirates. And there's a few that we've heard of, that many of us have heard of over the years. But this woman, I actually found out about her through reading a guidebook on this one part of Ireland, and it just mentioned that you can go to Grace O'Malley's gravesite, and it said Pirate Queen Grace O'Malley, and it was like, what? Pirate Queen Grace O'Malley? How have I never heard of this person? And I was completely shamed, and internally, of course, and then promptly started researching and discovering all the places I could go to find out more about her, and found a couple of wonderful books about her that are a little harder to find in the United States, and met somebody who is married to a descendant of Grace O'Malley, and just really her story is really incredible.
I'm sure the audience, probably heard of Anne Bonny, and I think she was
and Mary Read.
Okay, that's it. I was trying to think of her friend's name, but what was special about Grace O'Malley? What were some of her exploits?
So Grace O'Malley was sort of the descendant of a pretty wealthy family. Her father was a merchant, and they sort of ruled from Clew Bay, which is just north of Galway, and kind of that sort of the northwestern coast there, which is fairly rugged as you get up closer into County Donegal in that area. And she really disliked the English. She had, of course, like many kids, talking politics and seeing the oppression that their families are fighting against. She gleaned that the English were at the and the king were at the core of their problems. And her father had he was a rebel, and he declared he wanted to wage war on the English and kind of teamed up with the Spanish Armada. And this is what really hooked me about Grace O'Malley. So the story is that she was 11 years old, and she wanted to learn to fight. She wanted her father to teach her the pirating ways, and she wanted to learn to fight, and she wanted to join him on the ship and fight the English. And he said, "Well, you're a girl, you can't." And he made some kind of comment like, "Your hair will get tangled up in the ropes." And then he left. Well, that night, while they were planning their route, she chopped off all of her hair and stowed on board the vessel. And as they set out to sea, there was young Grace O'Malley like, "Well, now you have to teach me because it's the only way I'm going to survive." And so that is how the Pirate Queen was really born. And what a great story. So there's a lot of, little stories about her. I'm only about halfway through reading this wonderful biography about her. But she ruled this coastline for most of her life. So 50-something years. I think she died when she was in her late 60s, early 70s. And there's one sort of castle. And when I say castle, it's sort of a humble castle. It's a bit more of a stone tower. So she had a castle on Clare Island, and then that's where she's said to be buried. But there's another castle. So there's one in Westport, and then there's another town called Eastport, which is just slightly east of Westport. And it's one of those places where you kind of have to hope that you wrote the directions down right, because you're wandering down this road, and I'm going there, and it's sunset, and there's literally a rock that just says castle. It's painted on the rock, says castle with an arrow. Like, okay, well, I'm going the right way, I guess. And so I pull up, and the sun is setting, and it's hitting this stone tower, and there's this wonderful story about Grace O'Malley. You can't go in it. This particular castle is having structural issues. And again, it's sort of more of like think of a squat Rapunzel tower. And I can share some pictures of her tower on my Facebook page later. But there's this great story that she died in this castle, and her bed was on the very top. And there's a hole in the wall that goes out toward the bay. So where the castle is, there's sort of a stream, and then it's one of those places where it's the moors. So when the tide comes in, you can pull a boat fairly close in, and the boat, then it quickly drops off into the bay. So the legend is that she would sleep at night and had a rope that went from her ship through the wall of the castle around her bedstead. So if anybody tried to take her ship in the night, the ship took off, it would pull her bed against the wall, and she would wake up and then would start to fight. So that's just one of the many wonderful stories about Grace O'Malley.
Okay. Varla, one of my friends from the conference, Rachel, just said, this is, love the guest. It's fascinating information. And, I started getting into a little bit of profiling from the conference as well. And, you do are presenting some interesting information about Grace having a motivation for what she's doing. It's just not all out, just slaughtering people. There's a reason. She's fighting for what's social justice, and you're creating an interesting profile for her that's different from maybe some of the other male pirates who are just there for, or got involved in piracy just for the money. But was there? Did she have a crew? And
oh yeah,
was she involved, like using a cutlass or a gun? Was there a certain weapon that she preferred? What does that say about her? I just, if you haven't gotten that far in your research yet, just
well, she certainly had a crew.
Okay.
And just consider the time in which she was born. I think she was under the rule of good old Henry VIII. And I think we all know that under Henry VIII, women were quite disposable. And Grace O'Malley had to really fight because her family came, she had this, she wasn't from an impoverished family. They had a goodly amount of money. And of course, as a woman we're talking like 1500s, right? Early 1600s. Mm-hmm. You didn't just inherit whatever your father had if you were the only one to inherit it. It always went to a brother, sometimes a cousin, or you marry and it goes to your husband and everything's actually really in your husband's name. And she didn't necessarily resist against that, because how could she really resist against that? However, she did manage to really put forth her own independence throughout her marriages and throughout her entire life on a level that is legendary. I mean, truly legendary. She certainly had a crew. She had a number of very, faithful crew members. I haven't finished all of my research. I have 2 other books that I'm reading on her. But she definitely had a stronghold. And she was a very fierce fighter. She actually really was feared by a number of other people, and of course the English themselves feared. Now, something interesting, there's a little bit of a parallel story that I heard in a couple of other places about when Elizabeth I took the throne. And she often said at that time, Henry VIII was not Catholic, right? So he mm-hmm. was basically saying, like, you have to, there's one king and one God, and all goes to me. And it's all mine, basically, mm-hmm. Now, Elizabeth was, I think I've got my history right, but Elizabeth was Catholic. And so there were several Irish families. They couldn't be called kings at the time, though they really were kings by Irish definition, but they were called earls because there could only be one king based on king, like Henry VIII. So Elizabeth actually offered a lot of she wasn't Catholic. It was Mary, Queen of Scots, who came along and was the Catholic one. Right. But Elizabeth did, when she came into reign, she did sometimes extend, like, if you just swear allegiance to me, I will restore your properties. And so that kind of background had happened a few times in her father's life and in her life growing up. I mean, you figure she kind of really started when she was 11 or 12. And, you know, she had a lot of trials and tribulations. She was impoverished. She did swear allegiance to Elizabeth in order to get some of her properties restored. There was a lot of things. I think she was probably, if she had you asked about a weapon, and I think that she was good with many weapons. I do know that she was a dead shot, so she had a really excellent hand with then it would have been kind of like a handgun, and I'm sure she always carried some other weapons on her. I haven't really got too deep into her weaponry, but I have a whole section in my book on like Irish weaponry and methods and what different pirates would use and why. But I'm not really done with that section yet. But that's a whole part of the book that I'm working on. But she does really appeal to me because she certainly did something a little different. Now, that's not to say that what Anne Bonny and Mary Read did, Grace O'Malley didn't dress like a man. She dressed like a pirate, but she didn't dress like a man. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, especially Mary Read, were known to dress like boys in order to like kind of hide themselves on ships, or if their ships were raided. Everybody knew Grace O'Malley was a woman, and she was fierce, and she was you don't get the name Pirate Queen. I mean, she was called the fearsome or gruesome Pirate Queen back then, and is still revered as the Pirate Queen. So really cool.
Was she just targeting only English ships, or is just open season on anyone?
She was, more than anything, she was protecting her sort of ancestral lands. This is my understanding. So she was she had a fleet of ships that were protecting sort of that coast of Ireland, and she was maintaining her stronghold. And should anybody come into that region trying to, of course, take her wealth or other wealth, then they were at her mercy. So she sailed, but she certainly spent a good deal of time just sort of in a slightly more defensive fashion, or I don't want to say opportunistic, but that was fairly common, actually, that people would sort of wait in a bay that they knew really well, whether it was in the Caribbean or in Ireland or in another part of the world. And then when merchant ships would come through, she could take hold. Or if she had a whole fleet of trading ships, I mean, she still kept that sort of merchant business going. And if anyone tried to, bother her, she would just, shoot them and take the ship over. So, I mean, as one does.
Okay.
So there's a lot more to her story, and that's, I'm only just sort of, a little bit into her. Because the thing is there's a lot of so once you hear her name, you can Google her name and you can find stuff on a few different websites. Of course, you can go to Wikipedia and there's a summary of her. But there's the book that I have, which I don't have right here with me, and so the name of the author has totally escaped me. But it's a woman, it's an Irish woman who spent 20 years researching, and then she wrote this book, and then she went back and did an annotated version 20 years later. So there's a more recent publication. And like any story and any, legend, there's all kinds of speculation. And you find this it can be especially difficult to find the truth about women, because there are so many layered stories. A woman that is powerful is often just thought of as evil, And so there'll be these stories where this person might get this legend, this reputation for being devilish or in cahoots with the devil or witchy or whatever. And it's really just because they had more land than someone else, and the person telling the story was the person in power or wanted to be in power. And so you definitely have to take a real kind of, I guess, just a careful approach. You could read about it all you want, but if you're going to actually try and like write it or like I want to put it in a book, I'm really trying to make sure that the information is accurate and that what I'm putting in there isn't, just the rumors. But this woman's book is just incredible. It's extensively researched, and she interviewed people who were descendants. There are still descendants of the O'Malleys. In fact, that's who operates the ferry to get out to Clare Island, where her grave is descendants of the O'Malleys. Actually, I think it's called O'Malley Ferry Company. So there's a lot of misinformation. I don't even know if it's misinformation, but there are a lot of dribs and drabs of information that aren't entirely accurate. There are some good resources, but overall, I would say there's some general assumptions that I think the woman who researched the book sort of disproved about her. And so I can't really give the full scope until I've done my own research, which includes her book and 2 others that I'm reading, and then some interviews with people who are legends or descendants of Grace O'Malley.
Okay. Well, had another friend think that she must be related to Grace because she was also a good shot. Maybe Grace went to sail to Pompano Beach, but we could save that for another show. So I don't want to give your whole book away right now. So save your information for when it's completed, and you can come back and go into more detail, because you already have some of my friends already wound up. So
I'm
so we
working
should
as fast as I can. I swear.
Okay. Well, okay. So hopefully it will be done soon. You already have about 3 or 4 people wanting the book, so it's we'll let you finish that and fill us in on all the details when it's completed. But you also went to one of your favorite literary heroes' grave site. You went to William Butler Yeats's grave. I think he's in all of your books. Some quote at the beginning of a chapter or a whole chapter in one of your one of his poems is in all of your books. He was another 20th century author from that northwestern part of Ireland. Okay, so let's switch over from the pirates to William Butler Yeats and your interest in his literary career. What was going on at his gravesite as well?
So he's buried. It's actually this kind of great story. You may have heard it about his grave, and I'll see if I can get it right, because I had never heard this story before. So he's buried. It's in County Mayo. It's in County Sligo, and it's just right outside of kind of like the town of Sligo. You go to this. You could easily pass it. There's just all of a sudden this brown sign that says Yeats' grave with an arrow. And I mean, it's an official sign and everything, but I don't know. I think I was expecting like this, massive, big sign with, I don't know, scroll work or something saying the grave of William Butler Yeats, take your next right. Or, here in the U.S., it's always like on your right, 1 more mile on your right, 1 more half
with
mile
neon
on
light.
your right. Take your right here. Okay, now so it's often you're cruising along, and Ireland's happened again and again. It's just like don't miss the brown signs. You're going to see these brown signs, and they are key because they're historic landmarks, castle ruins, old churchyards. So Yeats' grave. So I pull over, and there's actually kind of two. It's not 2 cemeteries, but it looks like there's 2 cemeteries because there's a kind of a wide path in between them, and there's a church, and then it looks like there's a couple of little shops and like a place to get tea or something. And so it's just not at all what I expected, and I certainly had never looked up what his grave looked like or anything like that. And you park and you just sort of stroll over, and I walk up, and I immediately notice this cat. This cat is sitting on this grave, and I make eye contact with this cat, and I say hello, and I squat down, and this cat just comes tearing across the little gravel lot in front of the church and just gets basically right into my lap. And then I look up, and I see that the cat was actually curled up on Yeats's grave. And I didn't even notice the gravestone because I was so enchanted with this adorable little black and white kitty that was just purring really loudly and just loving. And then my son came along, and he sat down, and the cat just curled up on his lap. I mean, it was just the most adorable thing. And I couldn't help but think that I thought, well, that would make sense if he came back as like a cat and just hung out on his own grave to see who came to see him, and then, bestowed some affection on people who acknowledged him. So it's just kind of funny. And then his grave is very simple. It's a very just says W.B. Yeats, and just gravel stones, and just very, very simple, but a nice headstone. So it doesn't say this anywhere like at the church. And there's a little church there, and you can go in and kind of just wander around the cemetery, and the mountain, I think it's called Belboven, is like right there that he wrote a poem about, and he kind of had his own eulogy saying, like, bury me at the base of this mountain. And so you couldn't actually see the top of the mountain because it was very foggy that day, which just added to the atmosphere, of course. Mm-hmm. So I picked up a book. I think it might have been in the gift shop, and it was talking about how he died in, I want to say he died in Spain or something like that. And so his body was shipped back, but it was, his friend said the only thing left of, Yeats in that box is like a femur bone or something. So they said that wasn't him, that there was rumors that the box was really light and that the bones that were in there didn't belong to him. And so in more recent times, they actually did some genetic testing, and in fact, the skeleton that is in the grave is not believed to be fully William Butler Yeats. And they're, because I think he was actually buried and then exhumed and brought there. So he was like, oh yeah, this is definitely Yeats, right? Like, here, just take give me some money for it, and I guarantee you this is Yeats' femur or whatever. So I didn't know that, but I thought that was kind of interesting. So it's really kind of regardless of how many of his bones are in that grave. His father was the word isn't reverend. The words escaped me, but his father was basically like the clergy of that church, and so his father is buried right next to him. That's another reason why he's placed there. And yeah, I mean, that's just I just spent a lot of time with the cat, and I'm just curious if anybody else has visited that grave in the last few years and met this cat, because I think they probably would know exactly what I'm talking about. This little white or black and white cat, just very sweet and kind of petite, and just like the sun itself right on. Of all the graves, he really suns himself and curls up. There's even a little bit of like a spot you can see in the stones where the cat has sort of made his little bed on the grave. And I think it's maybe he's just figured out that that's where all the people are going, and he'll get the most pets and potentially the most, cheese or something if people hang out, he just gets the most affection if he hangs out on Yates's grave. But it's really cool. And then there's actually this wonderful little shop there. So it's not grotesquely touristy. There's this lovely little tea shop where you can get like the most amazing teas and pastries and things. But also right there was this great kind of art gallery. And in that art gallery were several pieces of jewelry and books by this man that I had Sacred Stone Sites of Ireland, and I had gotten it like 20 years ago, and you can't find it in the United States. And he's just published like a handful of these books about different sacred sites and the Wheel of the Year and some different things like that. And they had a whole collection of them. So I was like, this place is just great. So, buying up the books and talking with a guy there who hand makes instruments and things like that. And so that's my Yates story, a little more Irishy than super magical, but it was magical in its own way. And he's, he's in all of my books because I wrote about mermaids. Of course, he has writing about mermaids, but especially banshees and changelings and fairies. He knows he spent so much time in Ireland, traveling around Ireland, gathering these stories, the old stories, as they say, and putting them into paper at a time when the Irish culture was really in jeopardy of losing a lot of those things. And yes, he put his own kind of spin on them, and certainly there's a little, there's a tinge of ethnocentrism in there, I think, but I also think that he preserved some aspects of the Irish culture kind of single-handedly by doing that, and he was already a respected writer when he did that, so people listened to him, and I think that's something of great value, and one of the reasons I really admire him so much. And I know you're a fan too.
Yeah, and his was the Lake Isle of Innisfree is pretty much a classic 20th century sample of poetry. Yeats came along. He's like one of those transitional figures in literature where, like you said, there's a lot of things going on, and where the Irish culture was really losing its identity, and he really did try to make the readers not forget their proud heritage.
And he was and still is beloved because writers and storytellers, poets were and are important. And in Ireland, there has always been a history of the importance and the reverence for that as an art form. And so, I mean, a lot of places have hero worship, but it's pretty cool when that hero worship is, a bunch of super cool writers and musicians, and your occasional pirate queen thrown in.
I'll say, I'm glad you're telling us about how much you got out of this research vacation, and just need to put it all in a.
That's exactly what it is.
A book now, yeah. But where is William's body? Where's the rest of it? And it's kind of like, sounds like Einstein's brain, where his entire brain was not with his body when it was buried. What do we know? What happened between Spain and Ireland when he was returned?
So, no, we don't. We know that he died, and it could actually not have been Spain. It could have been. Hold on, let me look. I have the book right here that has the story in it.
Okay.
Because that's the kind of thing. Okay, so he actually died in France. He died in France.
Oh.
So
okay.
he died in France. It was 1930s, so it was pre-World War II, and he was buried there. But he was buried, when he was buried, it was always a temporary grave, right? Like, it was like, okay, of course he's going to go back to Ireland. So what we know, and I read a kind of an interesting article, like a BBC article from a few years ago about this, and so we know that, so he said that he wanted to go back to Ireland. Those were his, like, final wishes. His family made those arrangements, and we, to the best of everyone's knowledge, they sent they sent him back, and he was repatriated. That's what everybody thought until, I think, like about 10 years ago, when it came out that there was a lot of mingling of bones at the time, because he actually wasn't repatriated until after World War II, because when the time came to repatriate him and things, took a while, World War II broke out. And the last thing that was going to happen then, if he was in France, France was like being completely bludgeoned during World War II. So the repatriation of William Butler Yeats took a back seat. So what they think supposedly is that his bones, that when they exhumed him, and they may have left him there on purpose for a period of time, because if you think about it, you can't just like bury a body for like 6 months and then go and get it. You really kind of got to give it time to decompose, right? Otherwise you're carrying this really stinking, rotting thing. So it was probably always meant to be a bit of time before it was exhumed, before his body was exhumed and repatriated. So we don't really know, but there are suggestions that his bones were mixed up with the bones of others who were being similarly in temporary graves and were being moved or repatriated. So we don't, how great would it be to find out who's actually there? Who's in his grave, like who's been hanging out in his grave. And I want to tell you what his grave says, because I have a picture of it here. Because I took some photos, and I have photos of the cat too, which I should put up on the page after. So his grave is very simple, and it says, "Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by," which is a quote of his. And then it just says W.B. Yeats, and it says, the year he was born and then the year he died. So he was born in 1883, died in 1939. So, yeah, I don't know. There's probably a lot more to the story that I haven't really read up on, but they don't know how or why. but they're speculating that it was mixed up just, not on purpose.
No, it happens. I've had included that in an article where there are like 3 femurs in one ossuary collection, and they know it's either curators of the museum know it's not a valid DNA testing site. So I understand it. We've discussed that on the show.
I have an article here. Yeah, it says. Hold on. Let's see. I printed part of this article that I read a while ago. So it says. There were always doubts about the authenticity of William, but this is from Irish Times from like 2015. There were always doubts about the authenticity of William Butler Yeats's bones, even before they were transferred from France for reburial in Drumcliff Churchyard in September 1948, post-World War II. Aware that the poet's remains had been scattered in an ossuary in 1946, Yeats's friends attempted to dissuade his widow, George, from going through with repatriation. At the ceremony in County Sligo, the poet Louis MacNeice protested that the shiny new coffin transported by the naval service was more likely to contain a Frenchman with a club foot. That was his quote. So I think they knew that it was very unlikely that they would be able to identify his bones correctly and then send it. Then it says Bernard Collot, the French diplomat who was sent to Roqueburn to locate Yeats's missing remains early in 1948, probably paid a hefty sum, might I add, 9 years after the poet's death, reported that it was, quote, impossible to return the full and authentic remains of Mr. Yeats, and proposed asking Dr. Rebelot, the local sworn pathologist, to reconstitute a skeleton presenting all the characteristics of the deceased. So what they thought might have been an accident actually may have been sort of somewhat deliberate in order to just appease the family. Alfred Hollis, an Englishman who died around the same time as Yeats and who was initially buried next to him, wore a steel corset for spinal tuberculosis. In his certificate of exhumation from March 20th, 1948, Rebelot based his reconstitution of Yeats' skeleton on the presence of a thoracic corset. Yeats' son, Michael, said he wore a leather truss for a hernia. So maybe they're saying it could have been this other guy whose bones were hanging out in this ossuary. I mean, I'm sure now, today, they can actually do DNA testing and, probably figure out whose bones those actually are. But it's kind of this great scandal.
No, I'm sure there's a descendant alive. William died only in about 90
30s.
years ago. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's got to have great grandson still alive. But once you get your pirate book done, your next book can be on where are William's remains.
Yeah.
So there we go. And
where
got
in
another
the world
trip.
is William?
Yeah. There you go.
God, that would be a fun project, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, that's the kind of thing there. I just thought, I'm just going to go see, Yeats's grave, and then I just stumbled upon this whole backstory that I personally didn't know about, and I'm not an expert on him, but I'm certainly a fan. So, a fangirl of Yeats.
Okay, so let's see what. Since we're covering a lot of these European settings, Sligo and Westport and Clew Bay, in your paranormal parlor, might as well stick with the Halloween theme and look at the subterranean cemeteries. And our buddy Jeff Bellinger gave you his report on visiting the Parisian catacombs.
Yes.
Maybe touch on that for a little bit, and maybe we can get in the book channeled by Mark Twain, or Mark Twain channeled a book to
yes, the
what's
Ghost
her name?
of Mark Twain.
Yeah, that's it.
Emily
Yeah.
Grant Hutchings. Yes, the novel written via Ouija board. Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Let's stick with bones. Should we go down the bones?
We just
first.
Yeah. You just go from an above ground cemetery to underneath the city of Paris.
Yes, and for anyone who isn't familiar with like an ossuary is essentially like a place where bones or bodies are laid to rest, and the bones are often displayed in a beautiful fashion. There's an ossuary in the Czech Republic that has a chandelier that's made of all the bones in a human body. And there's a lot of sort of like artful arranging of these bones, but it's often a place where maybe the family wasn't there to pay for the marble headstone. The catacombs in Paris and what was wonderful about this story for me personally is that when Jeff Belanger was telling this story, I had been there. I've been in those catacombs. So I was really able to visualize his setting. And the other part that I really love is that we know him for founding Ghost Village and for doing the New England Legends, and he's written tons of wonderful books, Encyclopedia of Haunted Places, and he's got this great podcast, and he makes, he appears on TV all the time, and he's a really, really nice man and a really talented writer. And so as a fan of his, what made it extra special is that he tells the story of his first truly paranormal experience. And he had already started Ghost Village and was very interested in the paranormal, but this was the first time that he had his an actual sighting where it kind of really changed his outlook and turned things turned him, I wouldn't say turned him to the other side. He was already interested in it, but it gave him this whole new perspective and really made him a believer. And I love that especially. I think that that probably shows in his writing as well. So the story is basically, the catacombs in Paris are these underground tombs. There's a series of tunnels and rooms, and what happened is that there was no more room. Paris was overrun. There's no more room left in the cemeteries, but there's all these underground areas and tunnels and sewer systems. During the plague, during various sort of bouts of tuberculosis and horrible illness, there were so many bodies that there was nowhere to put them, plus no one to pay for their burial. And so the catacombs were formed, and they're pretty, if you are claustrophobic, it's not a great place to be. They're not tight as in the ceilings are low, but you're underground, and it feels like you're underground. I think there's a little bit of light as you first go in there, and there's lights in there, of course. And I mean, the rooms are your head isn't grazing the ceiling, although he's pretty tall. So I think for him, his head was probably, he had to duck to get in through the different entrances and such. So picture a hall where the walls, instead of being, stucco or drywall, are skulls. Skulls just piled on top of one another. Sometimes there might be an arrangement like a heart or some different kind of design. Essentially what would happen is these would be like people who were in a mass grave, and then the skeletons were exhumed and they were arranged. And it was really actually meant to be not gruesome, but an homage. It was a way of giving these bones a resting place, a somewhat artful resting place, rather than just being in some pit somewhere. So just basically, he goes down there, and I don't want to completely give away his whole story, but he's walking down, and as well known as these are, they're pretty hard to find, and there's not a lot of people that actually really go for it and go all the way in there. So I know for myself, it was many years ago when I was there, I was alone in the catacombs for a good chunk of time, completely alone. I didn't have any paranormal experiences there. I was pretty enraptured, but I didn't have any paranormal experiences. But he essentially saw a ghost there. There was a man walking down the aisle, and he couldn't figure out how that person wasn't at the end of the row when it dead ended, and he couldn't have gone past him. And it's a beautiful story. I encourage you to buy the book and read it, because it's really great. And one of the things I did in that book is I made sure that when I included someone's story, I didn't just have them like, oh, just send it over to me, or I actually just either sat down with them or had a phone call with them and had them tell me the story, and I took notes. And I didn't record it. I just took notes, and I listened. I took notes, and then I very quickly went and wrote the whole thing up, and then I sent it back to them, and I said, oh, did I get this right? Because I really wanted to capture a little bit of that essence of that storytelling, of like, just the instance of them telling me, and I was trying to capture their voice, but also be able to keep a cohesive voice within the book. And that's what I did. And then, people were able to go through and say, you totally got the name of that wrong, or whatever it was. So I'm forever grateful to him for sharing that story with me, but I'll never forget, more than being able to put it in my book, was just sitting on the phone and just listening to this story. And there I am, sitting in my dining room, but I'm not in my dining room at all. I'm with Jeff Belanger, and I'm in the Paris catacombs, and there's some sort of like ghost with a hat walking, it was just very, very transfixing to listen to. So hopefully it comes across in the book as well as it did into my ears.
Yeah. And if people like Jeff's story in your Paranormal Parlor, they can always find the old 30-odd minutes video of you two. That one goes way back.
That's an old one. That's funny. Yeah, there's the 30-odd minutes. Yeah, I think that was one of my first video interviews. Actually, was that, and it was a good one because he was so goofy, but it was done on the computer, right? So I had to actually put a note to myself to not look at the screen, because when someone's talking to you on the screen, you're looking at them, but in the video you're looking off to the side, so I had to put a little note up by the webcam that said "Look here," because that way I would look like I was looking right at the camera the whole time. So that was silly.
No, it was a good video, and I think when I first introduced the idea of having you as a guest to Barbara, it was like, I think I sent that to her as a sample. I was like, oh, this is what Varla could do, and Barbara really enjoyed it, and like I said, it's just keeps getting better with each show after since then. So that one, and Jeff is a nice guy. I worked with him to set up a couple other shows, and yeah, that was a neat TV show he had going on there for a couple years.
Oh, actually, speaking of TV, I think so. I was on last in June. Is that right? I think I was on your guys' show in June, because it was before I had gone down to the Turks and such.
That sounds right.
So I was on CBS Sunday Morning with Faith Saley, and they came and they talked to me, and they did a bit on mermaids, and they called me up and said, oh, we were wondering if you would want to, answer a few questions about mermaids. And I was like, oh, of course I had. So we're talking, and she says, well, actually, we want you to be on the show. I said, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, okay, they're going to, do they Skype on CBS Sunday Morning? I don't think they do. And she said, well, you said, where are you based? And I'm thinking, okay, they must have, an affiliate studio. I just go into the studio. And she said, oh, no, we send a film crew to your house. So they sent a film crew to my house, and we hung out for, 5 hours, and we filmed, and we walked, and we lunched, and it was really fun. But that segment, I have that segment, the link to it up on my website if anybody wants to see the CBS Sunday Morning, because it's really cute. They also had a little bit of mermaid history, and then Faith goes and she tries to swim at this mermaid school at Weeki Wachee Springs in Florida, and it's really just like this. It's a very professionally done, beautiful segment, and they were just such nice people, and just the producer and Faith they were lovely, and the crew, the film crew, and the cameraman and the sound guy. We all went to lunch together. It was just like hanging out with friends. It was really great. So watch that segment. It's fun.
Okay, just do a shameless plug for your website.
Oh yes,
since you just
shall.
mentioned it.
Yes, it's varlaventura.net. So that's all. I think if you just type in Varla Ventura, then that will come up. And that's where I try and, keep those kind of things, and radio appearances and things like that. I try and keep it up to date with that.
Okay. Did you want to cover the Mark Twain channeling, or since we're talking about mermaids, do you want to get into any of the real authentic mermaid stories that they aren't the compassionate, beautiful, loving creatures?
Oh, they're not. But actually, I want to tell you about something else. I want to totally jump ship.
Okay.
And I want to ask you, because I haven't gone, and I have always wanted to go, and I wanted to ask you if you know about the Bram Stoker Festival in Dublin, Ireland. It's every year.
No, I haven't thought.
It's like, because I know you're a fan of Bram Stoker, and it's every year. Excuse me, it's every year, and it's the kind of in the week before Halloween. there's a series of events. It's usually 4 or 5 days long, and it's just, it's just called the Bram Stoker Festival. They do seance reenactments, showings of various movies that are inspired or based on Bram Stoker stories, lots of vampire stuff, just talks and lectures about him as a writer, pub crawls, of course, just like a whole like 4 or 5 day festival, just that sort of, vampiric and really in homage to Bram Stoker. And I had never heard of it. And I actually, when I was going, I don't know how I had never heard of it. Maybe I honestly don't know how this was off my radar, but I read about it in the in-flight magazine. Aer Lingus in-flight magazine had all of this info about these different festivals in Ireland, and it said in October, don't miss the Bram Stoker Festival in Dublin, which is where he's from. And he went to school. I think he was born in Dublin, and he went to school at Trinity College, right there, right there in Dublin. So I know that we've talked about Bram Stoker on and off before, but I just wanted to share that information specifically with you, but also with all the listeners. But I knew you would get a kick out of that, and you can put that on your ultimate travel bucket list.
Yeah, it sounds very, and it's really interesting that he went to Trinity College because that's where they have the famous Book of Kells on display.
Yes, I saw it. I saw the Book of Kells. Yeah, I'd always wanted to, and I'd never been willing to shill out the $25 before, but this time I just said, I got to do it. And you know what? It's worth it. But the reason it's worth it is not for the Book of Kells, in my opinion. It's worth it because you get into the old library. That's why it's worth it, because you get into this library that looks like it should be part of Hogwarts. I mean, it's got, rows and rows of all these magical books and statues and archways and card catalogs, and it just smells like old book in there, and it's so huge and beautiful. It's the Great Hall in this old library, and that you have to go by the Book of Kells. You literally have to pass by the Book of Kells to get up into the old library. It's quite impressive. So if I had just realized that many years ago, I would have probably paid the money for it. But because I thought, Book of Kells. And the Book of Kells is cool. It's pretty, but it's kind of hard to see, and there's a lot of people jammed around. Well, at least when I was there were just a lot of people jammed around it, and so you can't really get you can see it well, but you can't really get to know it. Can't get that close to it, really. So
okay. Barbara, maybe Blog Talk can do a all expenses paid host appreciation type trip to this festival, Bram Stoker Festival. What do you think?
Well, I'll put it up to management and see what they say.
Oh, management! You can't trust management.
They have the purse strings.
Well, it sounds like just anything. Going back to Ireland for these things we've been talking about. It sounds like it'd just be a lot of fun.
Mark, go ahead and do it. Just save your receipt. And we can laugh at them together.
Yeah. To whom do I turn them in?
Management, of course. I don't know if you have their email or not. So.
It'll be. I'll have to make another call to
they're really
English
quite amazing.
robo-babe.
They have circular offices.
In one door, out the other.
Yeah. I kind of, it's going to be like a
traditionally called
dog
the
chasing its tail. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, we better get back to the creepy stuff. We're getting too silly for the solemnness of the season. But Varla, do you want to get into the Mark Twain story from your Paranormal Parlor book?
Of course.
That's it does fit.
Yeah.
Fit it. Oh, okay.
No, I was just going to say I did also just want to share a little thing because this is related to the origins of Halloween. So I thought this would be kind of fun for, what with it being October and all. But it actually relates to mermaids, believe it or not, but it also, of course, relates to the fairy kingdom. And it was just a little bit of the reiteration that I hope comes across somewhat in my books, but that is certainly a philosophy of mine. And it's not my philosophy at all. It's the Irish way, but it's a belief I really subscribe to, and it's the idea that the fairy kingdom it's associated with the underworld. And it is associated with all manner of beastly, goblin-y, ghoulish things. But that does not inherently make it an evil place or a dark place or a scary place, except on one night of the year. And that is All Hallows Eve. That is Halloween, or Samhain in the Celtic tradition. And that is the night in which the gate, that portal, that cave, and there are caves throughout Ireland that are known as caves that are as portals into the underworld. And there was one that I went to on this trip that was there was a very specific story associated with it. And you can go inside the cave. I didn't go inside the cave. You had to prearrange that, and I obviously don't plan ahead really that much. But
I would have never guessed.
The idea is that you just got to kind of feel things out sometimes. But the idea that will not be unfamiliar to your listeners is the idea of Halloween being a time when this veil is thin, and that we dress as beasts and ghoulies and ghosts to sort of blend in, so that our souls aren't sucked back into that underworld, so that the devilish little things that are dancing about, and the witches and the wild things, don't mistake us. They think we're among them, we're one of them, and they don't harass us. They just continue on with their revelry. And in the Celtic tradition, this would be basically usually Morrigan, or sometimes it would be Maeve, depending on the story. But it was a goddess, a woman, who would open that portal. She would just open that portal, and on Samhain she opens the portal, and all these things stream out. You've got werewolfy things and vampires and all the little things that we try and dress up as on Halloween. And the idea is kind of to just unleash all of these things, let them have their night of revelry, and then close it up, because now we're going into a time of darkness, the coldness of winter, the lack of agriculture and green things traditionally, right? And especially you can think of in Ireland, there's definitely a big turning of the seasons at that time. Here where I live, everything's turning, the trees are dying. And so it's like, it's that idea kind of, of Mardi Gras or whatever. You're really getting it out of your system because you're entering into a kind of a more somber time. And it's important to enter into that without fear or anger or danger, you really are kind of like purging your system of those things. And I had a couple of kind of new perspectives on that, just based on talking to a couple local anthropologists near this cave and their take on it. And that marking of the seasons really was so pivotal in making sure that people were ready. You'd already had your harvest party. You've already stored everything. And, I mean, in many ways, it can almost be looked at, and this is probably like, you know, a dissertation in another life, but the idea that it's almost a way to combat, you know, seasonal sadness. It's almost a way to combat depression, because if you can remember that you have sort of moved among and spoken with and acknowledged and made offering and danced with the fairies and the goblins and the ghouls, you can go into the winter with more strength. And I thought maybe that is really why so many people I know are so attracted to Halloween. Not just because of all, you know, a love of horror and things like that, but because we share a penchant toward darkness, and it is actually this kind of burning bright bonfire that can carry you through until, you know, the days get longer again. And it was really a kind of a cool, I didn't mean to talk about Halloween. I was there in the middle of summer, but I didn't bring it up. It just came up. And there was all of this information about it that I knew, but like any subject that you're interested in, there's always a new perspective. There's always something new to learn. And I really liked that. I've always been very interested in, you know, Dia de los Muertos and the kind of honoring of the ancestors and really that aspect of Halloween and that time of year. But this was kind of another, it was almost a more psychological approach to it. And I really, it was great. So just wanted to share that little tidbit.
You just mentioned the, you know, talking with the anthropologists, and you know, this was one of those times of the years where you know, people might start getting the first symptoms of the seasonal affective disorder. But is this the holiday when there were the big bonfires that were built on tops of the hills, like the Hill of Slain? Is that the right is it the right holiday I'm talking about?
Yes, there are a lot of holidays in Ireland and Scotland that involve bonfires. Just so you know, like, I mean, that's a big mark of a celebration. For example, you know, Hogmanay in Scotland is really the New Year's celebration, and they do bonfires all over the night. Walpurgis Night is another, you know, the witches' night, where there are bonfires all over, you know, Germany and Ireland and different parts of the world. But a bonfire is usually a huge part of it, and that is, you know, part of the kind of dancing around the flame and keeping the goblins and ghouls at bay, but also dancing with them. It kind of gives you that opportunity to really explore that dark side in kind of a safe way, and you know, just really embrace that. It's almost like, I don't know, I think that's why people go to places like Burning Man, because they're like, you know, wearing their suit and tie it's too tight, and they just don't have the chance to really express their true nature. So they go to a place where they can really be whatever they want to be, and they need that permission to be that. And I think that Halloween does give us all that to a certain extent. Still, I mean, it's fun. It's like, what are you going to be for Halloween? Oh, I'm going to be and you can be anything you want to be, something you admire, something you are always. Like, I have close to the same costume every year. I'm surprisingly boring when it comes to Halloween. Costumes, that is.
That does what you just said does fit into with some ideas we're working on with where we're going to be looking at human monsters and who you may think they are when you talk to them on the computer, but in reality that they're somebody really freaky you don't want to mess with. So that's going to be a theme we're going to develop. But what you said is interesting, and you get all the like women dress as hookers and guys dress as girls for Halloween. So you get that weird kind of stuff going on too. And just be what you want to be. It's it's fun. Can be strange.
Yeah, it can be good strange. It can be kind of strange for sure. But traditionally, the reason that you would dress as like a little devil or a witch or a ghost is because you were actually out there and the children would dress like that because it would protect them on that night. They would be able to go around and collect their candy, or sometimes people would. So you'd have a big bonfire, and a lot of times the children would go and they would be getting donations from the wealthy houses. So you'd have, the peasant village, and then the children would be dressed up and they would go and they would get their the food and the drink, and the wealthy people needed to basically make these donations. And that sort of evolved into handing out candy. That tradition turned into slowly, especially once we were in the United States, that tradition turned into trick or treat. And fairies love to play tricks. So the trick part of Halloween you can really attribute to the fairy kingdom.
And speaking of being all these different something you're not most people aren't going to expect of you, playing tricks on others. One of the things I didn't realize, and you have a couple samples in Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, and I think it's in Paranormal Parlor, is some works from Sabine Baring Gould, and he's a minister who wrote the hymn Onward Christian Soldiers, but he's also writing these like the most well-respected books on werewolves. That kind of fits in with a little bit about what we've been talking. he's one of these people that just throws that curveball at us about a minister's real interests, and he's like looking at all these Norwegian werewolves, and they also show up in Iceland. Can you tell us a little bit about his career as a werewolf researcher?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely. He's Sabine Baring-Gould. He was a reverend, but probably most famously known for writing the hymn "Onward, Christian Soldiers." And he did quite a bit of traveling, probably spreading the word of God throughout parts of Scandinavia, up somewhat into Finland, Lapland kind of area, and then into Eastern Europe primarily, but mostly kind of in the northern countries. And he was English. And he was a really interesting, very well-educated man, wrote a lot about the philosophy of everything, the way that people look at things, the way that man's relationship with God, all those kinds of things. And he published a couple of other books, and that was actually fairly common at the time because reverends or people of the clergy were typically more educated and so could read and write, and were often then the scribes. Throughout history, you do see that. And so he traveled around, but because he was, I think this is speculation on my part completely because I didn't know the guy. But from his works, and he wrote this massive volume on werewolves, which I have read the entire thing, and it is crazy long and very Victorian. So it took some time, and I probably really understood, a third of what I was reading most of the time. Like, oh, werewolf. Okay, there we are again. But he was a very intelligent man, and he was very interested in other cultures, right? We know this. He's traveling around. So he would write down and record instances of werewolves. Sometimes his things were just what he wrote were just stories that other people relayed to him, legends. Other times they were his observations. And of course, these were totally imbued with a religious point of view and a misunderstanding of the culture to a certain extent, with an attempt to understand the culture. But there were instances of descriptions of things that would not be, that's not how a local would have put it, we'll just say. So he's both playing up the idea of werewolves as these ferocious beasts, inadvertently becoming one of the foremost experts on werewolves and werewolf legends. Specifically, this book is, were it to be in print today, it would probably be 800 pages long. It is a tome.
Oh, wow.
It is a tome, and there is a lot going on in there. But he also spends a lot of time speculating on the mentality of mankind and what is it in us that might make a werewolf. And he really has some wonderful sort of discourse with himself about, well, he actually gets into pregnant women and their hormones, which might be why the book never got published. But he does talk about kind of these extreme fluctuations that we have, attributed to hormones, attributed to life changes, attributed to whatever, just being a woman, hysteria, all of these things. And that those are actually evidence that werewolves exist. And the way he kind of connects it all is the idea that any one of us might at any point lose it. You could completely lose it. If someone made you mad enough and really threatened you enough, or threatened someone you love, you could. I think we've all been that mad at least one point in their life. If you haven't, good for you. But if you've ever just been so angry that you've seen red and you feel like you don't have control over your own hands, or you're just kind of losing control of your body to a certain extent. Not that you're going to go into a violent, murderous rage, but that is actually the thing that happens next, is the violent, murderous rage, or the the lashing out, or these kinds of things. So this is all his argument, not mine. This is his argument, that these things are inherent in every human, and that we must fight against them. But it is plausible that our nature, for some people, can actually turn to the point that we would become werewolves. So again, he's using this argument that werewolves are real. And that's what really tripped me out about the guy's entire book, was just that he isn't just talking about philosophy and recording these stories. He's kind of using them because you can tell that he believes in werewolves. But I imagine that if it was 1880 and you spent enough time in the dark Scandinavian woods, you too would believe in werewolves. So it kind of makes sense. But it's really, he's really an interesting character, and a lot of what we have that exists today that we know about werewolves, he did record it. He's not really known for that, but many, many people who have written werewolf stories, I would be very surprised if they hadn't read his book at some point.
Interesting point you made, and that book just sounds like it's a fascinating, I don't know what, compilation of like folklore and anthropology, sci-fi. It's like a little
sci-fi thrown in there.
Yeah, but from what you have, all. If we have to, cover that book in more detail, it's. I just need a little bit more time to read an 800-page book. I think we have quite a few of those already lined up.
Well, and that's the thing. It's not an easy read. So maybe it wouldn't be 800 pages long, but it sure feels like it. It's not an easy read. It really isn't. There are parts of it that are easy, and it just in that you can quickly kind of see that there's something there that you really want to grab hold of. But overall, it's a difficult read. You have to go back and make sure you're understanding the language, and so it's not only is it really, really, really long, it's probably the most boring book on werewolves you'll ever read. And that's like the sad way to put it. It's totally worth reading. It's amazing. There are things in there that are in no other book. And technically it's not fiction. So, but it's, if you're just expecting, I'm summarizing it in a much more colorful way than when you read it, you'll see what I mean. And you can dip in and out of it and find, pieces of it, but it's definitely not the most, it's amazing. Don't get me wrong. It's worth reading if you really are into werewolves or you're doing research on folklore, paranormal at all. But don't read it if you're tired. Do not read it if you're sleepy at all, because you won't
Okay,
stay awake.
There are some sections on shape shifting. That's not something that you would expect a minister to be delving into.
Or lycanthropic streams. You do not expect a minister to really be, kind of even talking about waters and plants that will transform you into a werewolf. But he does.
Right. I thought that was information that you brought out that I didn't know. I never really thought too much about a Christian hymn writer getting into werewolves, but when we've had Jason Jarrell on, we've looked at like a couple of the shaman that were buried in some of the mounds in the Ohio rivers where they had these like bear or wolf jaws actually inserted into their mouths, and they're draped in like a bear costume. It's like the same concept that this minister is writing about in the 1880s was being done here in America 2,000 years earlier. It's just really interesting that the same concept just has been there for thousands of years.
Right. By the time he came along and was even recording it, it had been already taking place. I mean, these were like old traditions. And then but it's also interesting how few people really sat down or traveled around and he was kind of like the Grimm brothers of werewolves. And the only other resource that I found that isn't just fiction stories is Elliot O'Donnell, who is another one of my favorite Irish writers, and he really struck a chord with me because a lot of the stories that you read, especially accounts and paranormal investigations during that spiritualist movement, so like 1840 to say 1930 especially, and even prior to 1840, you find these sort of stories where people don't really believe. And Elliot O'Donnell had a series of paranormal experiences happen to him when he was about 8 years old. So unlike many of the other writers and sort of Victorian era investigators, he wrote ghost stories. But he also researched folklore and things like that. But he was a believer. He wasn't a skeptic, and he had enough experiences that he felt that he felt that was evidence enough to him. But he also was probably one of my other best resources on werewolves, because he did also some research in Lapland and other parts of Scandinavia about the werewolves there, and compared them to some of the traditions in Ireland where he was from. And I think time and time again you have these traditions where whatever time of year they're for, they have different significance. There's times when there's festivals, when there's people donned in furs and cloaked with bear claws, and then you have the mummers, who are those kind of sort of odd Irish straw fellows that appear at festivals. You know, they're kind of like, yeah, they're very distinct looking. So you have times when people put on these costumes and they are embodying whatever it is that they are either afraid of or they're trying to invoke. So they need that power. And it might be the same thing, right? It could be the same thing. You're both afraid and in awe of and in reverence of this thing, like a bear that could feed your entire family for the entire winter and also could kill your entire family in one swoop. So there's this need to kind of pay that homage to it, and you see that in cultures throughout the world. And then you see the peepers of those cultures who are coming from like a very anglicized Christian point of view, not dogging Christians here. I'm just talking about that kind of ethnocentrism where there's only this one true way, and they are observing these things and they're calling them heathens and savages, and we know that these are actually these very specific, very important rituals. They're calling them werewolves and witches, and they are actually the ones that are, healing people and performing rituals for the good of the community. It can be community bonding. There's all these things going on that are simply recorded as being heathen because they're drinking something that looks like blood, but maybe it's just a root that tastes really good, or it could be beets. I mean, who knows? But it's just very interesting because a lot of what we have in that like written record and what we know today and a lot of our stories are based on really does come from this grand boom in literacy during the Victorian era, which has a lot of great things that came out of that. But at the same time, you did have a very kind of like civilized point of view looking down its nose at, just some really important cultural experiences that were happening. So,
and for a little while, we're still discussing werewolves. I think we can't, pass up having a brief discussion about the cutest werewolf, Elizabethan type girl on the cover of your Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires book. It's really
maiden.
one of the best. It's really one of the most eye-catching covers of any book I've seen. Tell us a little bit about the artist and the idea behind that artwork.
Well, thank you for saying that. That was designed by a man named Jim Warner, who actually died a couple years ago. He designed the covers for almost all of my books. He did Among the Mermaids, he did Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, and he did Banshees, Werewolves, Vampires, and Other Creatures of the Night. And he actually, I remember when he showed me the piece of art, it's from an old fairy tale. It was from like the cover of an old fairy tale or an ad from an old fairy tale. And I don't know how he found it. He was a master of finding the right piece of art for the book. For example, the cover of Among the Mermaids shows all these mermaids and very beautiful. It was actually an old hair tonic ad that where Among the Mermaids, that's where the ad would have been for this like hair tonic that would give you like flowing locks like a mermaid. So we think that this was some kind of advertising, but we're not absolutely sure. but it looks very Eastern European. But when he showed it to me, it just, it's completely like this incredibly sweet werewolf, and I fell in love with it, and we just knew right away it was the right cover, and he just did a really beautiful job of it. But we don't know what it was actually advertising. It could have been advertising hair tonic as well, quite frankly. Maybe it was advertising razors, but she's holding a little package, which always looks like a book to me. And I don't know, I just assumed it was female. She's in a dress, but it was kind of that bearded lady. But what's really nice about it is that you usually see these kinds of things looking very ferocious, but this one is a maiden and covered in fur, but also covered in flowers and beautiful patterns and things. So Jim Warner, love that man. And he just did a really, really great job with that. And I don't know, he had archives. He had worked in book design for years, and he had a little magic to him. He just got things, and he would, what's this book? Okay. And then the problem with him is he would show you 2 or 3 things and you loved them all. So then you just had to, say, well, I like that one the most. And then I don't really have final say in any regards over what my books look like. My publisher has to say, because their idea is to put what they think is going to do best in the market, because they're the publishing experts. I'm the writer. But that being said, writers always get a look at it and get to say, at least with my publisher, we get to say, well, I hate it, or, oh my gosh, I love it so much. And so in this case, it was a total love affair.
Okay. And I've always enjoyed that artwork. It's perfect for you. It just captures the unexplained very well. I just really find it captivating. But and in your Paranormal Parlor book, I think it's your Paranormal Parlor book. Since something like you could tell us about your leprechaun story over cocktails. So let's pretend we're having cocktails. We have about 7 minutes left.
Okay, so we're gonna drink.
It might be a better St. Patrick's Day story, but it's something unexplained for Halloween.
Well, I learned a lot about leprechauns in researching my my Fairies, Fugus, and Changelings book. And so I learned that they were more than just, these green-clad little fellas holding on to all the gold. They have a lot of interesting relationships with kind of being cobblers and little red caps, and there's a lot to them. But I think what you're asking about is the story that I saw Leprechaun when I was a kid. And that is a story that I didn't really feel super comfortable sharing for many, many years, just like a lot of people say, I had this ghost experience, but I didn't really I don't really believe or whatever. And with something like a leprechaun, most people are not going to believe you anyway. They're not going to believe that you saw a leprechaun. But when I was a kid, I saw a leprechaun. I was playing down by this creek, and I saw what looked like kind of a smallish man, more sort of dressed foresty than dressed, all fine with like a vest and hat and waistcoat and such on. Just this kind of like foresty looking little thing, and it had a man's face, but it was definitely seemed more animal like. And we lived by this river, so we moved to a very rural area and lived by this river for about 3 months. We lived in a trailer, my mom, my sister, and my dad and I. And that was just our family at the time. And my sister and I would play all the time on this creek, and there were lots of people around all the time. Then summer ended, and all the kids went back to school, and we hadn't moved yet. My parents were actually in the process of purchasing some property, and so we were at this basically empty campground along the river and with this creek flowing into it. So I'm playing down there one day, just playing by this creek, and I see this guy, this leprechaun, and I immediately just yell, which would be like probably, not the thing to do if you see a leprechaun, don't scream out loud. But I just yelled and I said, Mom, you've got to come see this. There's a leprechaun over here. And in that just split second of turning and shouting and then turning back, there was nothing there, of course. But what I'll never forget is that the leaf was moving as if something had been there and had darted off, like a rabbit would dart off. So, that's my leprechaun story. It's not a super convincing one. I don't really have a lot of evidence, but I will say that we frequently tend to dismiss things that happen to ourselves as children, as we also dismiss children's stories when they tell us things about the paranormal or things that they've seen. And I think that that's a big mistake, because I do think kids have the ability to see things without filters and to tell you things. And it's not until you as an adult, or we as adults, tell them that they should be afraid or that it doesn't exist, they don't know that up until that point. So I do think that there's a lot more credibility. Like, I don't dismiss it because I was a kid. I just don't have any physical evidence other than my memory of it. But it's a very vivid memory. And I'd had a few other paranormal experiences at that point, and this was very different from, a ghost sitting on the end of my bed or anything like that. So, and I'm lucky because my mom didn't tease me about it or anything. She just said, actually, my mom said, "Where?" And then probably went out under full moonlight after all the children were asleep and tried to invoke the leprechaun. So that's probably more like what had happened.
Okay. I'm glad you shared the story with us, and I just want to bring out more of your enthralling observations from another one of your books, and we're gonna have to keep having you come back to give us more, since we're almost out of time. So, Barbara, do you want to wrap up the show for us, so I don't, just, we're probably gonna have to have you do it, since both of us babble so much, and we need a referee to end the show for us.
I'd be happy to, Mark. I want to thank everybody for being with us here tonight, and certainly Varla's books are amazing. So please do check them out. They're on Amazon, and I believe I have them on my website as well. Do check them out. They are wonderful reads. They're enticing, they're enchanting, educational, enjoyable, and informational. It's a win-win always round. We're looking forward to seeing everybody next week. We have a lot of shows scheduled. And visit our YouTube channel. If you enjoy what you listen to and hear, please subscribe to it. Thanks for being with us tonight, And do keep touch with us because we are around a lot this next week. So, good night, everybody.